All right, Derek, thanks so much for joining me today.
Glad to be here. Glad to help.
Yeah, I was excited to see that you were on the docket of the Northwest Action Summit, where you and I both presented last weekend, because I just think this topic of ADUs is something that is still maybe a little bit more underground than it needs to be. And I think a lot of real estate investors can really benefit from figuring out how they can incorporate this into their investing strategy. So I'm excited to chat with you.
Outstanding. Yeah, let's dig into it. I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah. So I guess just for context, what is an ADU for somebody who's not maybe 100% sure what this means, first off?
Yeah, great question, Jeff. So I'll just give you a quick fly overview. An accessory dwelling unit is a second, this is the most important point, legal dwelling on a lot that's primarily been reserved for single family housing. So it's not a multifamily setup. It's not multiple houses on a multifamily lot. It's a second legal dwelling on a lot that's been reserved primarily for single family housing. And I call it the back door to an affordable duplex.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm actually excited in a little bit. I want to chat about kind of the distinction between duplexes and ADUs and how maybe they're a little bit of a chameleon that, like, in some ways you can sort of argue they're one, in some ways you can argue they're another, but we can circle back to that. So how did you kind of, because you are that ADU guy, right? How did you, that doesn't happen by accident, right? Like, how did you first fall in love with the concept of ADUs and become such an advocate for them?
Well, I started my ADU journey in 1996 as a curious high school student. I had a woodshop teacher that kind of took me under his wing. He started a construction technology class, and there was about 10 or 12 of us. He put together a group of kind of troubled kids, if you will, and we built an illegal accessory dwelling unit for one of our other high school teachers. And so that was my first experience with the ADU strategy. And for better or worse, I kind of tunnel visioned into the process, the art of building it, the art of planning it. And from there, I started a carpentry apprenticeship. I got my license as a builder right after high school. And I went kind of headfirst into the feast or famine world of contracting at a really young age in the late 90s, early 2000s. So it was by necessity that I got into the business. It was how I was able to feed myself. And then over time, I just continued to hone. It went from an interest to an obsession. And I really have been just laser focused, for better or for worse, again, on this one strategy that's really an inch wide and several miles deep at this point. I'm still learning. I'm not going to call myself an expert, but I will say ADU experts usually will call me with their questions. So I'm always glad to help, and I'm always glad to talk ADUs.
Yeah. So to say you were an early adopter of ADUs is like an extreme understatement. I mean, I feel like I was kind of an early adopter, and I was at least a decade later than that to even really come on my radar screen. So that's amazing. And then I know that, like, your heart, I guess probably your heart and your mind have said, like, this is actually really a key to housing in the United States. And I know that it's become a passion for you. So what is it that kind of like got into your soul and said, like, no, I need to spread the word on this thing?
Yeah, great. And I'll be a little vulnerable here, Jeff. It was really the lack of affordability that I saw growing up with a kind of a struggling artist, single mom. The stuff was hard, and housing was always a challenge in my family. And I moved around a lot as a kid, and it's something that's near and dear to my heart. I do have what I would consider still a lot of privilege, but housing in my childhood and my early adult life was really hard. And so now I look at this as a way that I can potentially give back. Needed infill housing is something that's really, again, near and dear to my heart. And it also just makes sense. I always like to cover just a brush on demographics, that the American household is changing. We don't need 2,000 square feet for 6 people anymore. We really need, most 62% of all US housing right now is filled with 2 or less people. So this is a strategy that is going to provide more needed infill housing. It's not affordable, but it is more affordable. And really the base of your question is because I grew up in apartments, and I never had the opportunity to live in potentially a house that didn't have shared walls. And I'm looking for, kind of the opportunity to share that with people. So that's where it's evolved from. It started as a build and a way to feed myself. And it's kind of turned into what I kind of call advocacy work and outreach.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, when we met the other day and when I heard your presentation, it was just really clear that it's a topic that it's not just like, oh, this is kind of what I do and my brain knows about, but that your heart's really into it and you believe a lot in it as well. So one of the questions that came to my mind, I wrote it down when I was listening to your presentation the other day that I saved up to ask today, is ADU allowances and zoning codes and building rules and whatnot are very regionalized, maybe you'd say, right? It's sort of unique from town to town or state to state. So, not like a scientific answer, but when you kind of look at the whole country, like what percentage of the country, as far as you know, are ADUs, legal and that there is like a code specifically for them, to your knowledge? I'm just wondering, we've got listeners kind of all over the place. I know this isn't something that just works in various parts of Oregon. It works in lots of different parts of the country, but like how have ADUs proliferated everywhere at this point?
Yeah, that's another great question. So ADUs are kind of sweeping across the country. And one thing that I'd like to tack on to your last question is there was also a lot of luck involved in my story, and being in the industry in Oregon, where we were, before we even knew it, we were setting the industry standard on accessory dwelling units. We really are, and have a lot of the model code across the country is based on best practices in Oregon, and specifically up north in Portland, Oregon. So we have now, I would say, and this is, don't quote me on exact numbers, but I would say probably 20% of states have kind of overarching state legislation that says, cities and counties, you've done kind of a crappy job the last 50, 60 years managing long, mid, and short-term planning, and we're going to tie your hands and make it easier for housing units to be produced. So with that being said, there's some really strong accessory dwelling unit states. I mean, Oregon, California, New York, Connecticut, they're coming into practice every single day. And I'd like to say that COVID, whether it was directly related to the pandemic, or maybe people just had more time, or there was more organized legislation, really the last 2 years, there's been some huge growth in this ADU opportunity across the country. And to touch on your original question of why is it so different in every area? Because most state laws and most states that implement this are saying, hey, these are allowable uses in any single family zone that outright allows a single family house that is dependent on realistic siting and design standards. And that language allows municipalities and AHJs to kind of put their little twist on there. There's still a lot of states that haven't got on board with this. Some of the states that have got on board are making it really easy to permit, really easy to build, but they're putting certain restrictions like parking or residency requirements or no short-term rentals, things like that. So the overall answer is it depends a lot based on area. And I always tell people, and you can't stress this enough, to become an expert in your local zoning code, because what you can do, even one city in Oregon where ADUs are very well established, you're not going to be able to do maybe one city over. So state to state, county to county, all the way across the country. For investors, a good kind of rule of thumb that I tell people to follow is if you can, look for blue areas in red states. And that is probably kind of the home run of a new emerging ADU market, where you have planning, you have legislators, you have city council members, you have planning commissioners that are pro infill housing. And then you also have overarching state legislation that is a little bit more landlord friendly. And when I say landlord friendly, it's not like stick it to the tenant, because that's not how I feel. I mean, I come from the lens of a tenant, and how do we create good housing for our customer? Without our customer, we have nothing. So when I say it's landlord friendly, it just means that it's easier for landlords to provide really good quality and more affordable, more attainable housing for tenants.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember you saying that the other day, become an expert in your local zoning code. And I feel like that's something that we don't talk about enough, probably in the real estate investing community at large, but specifically even in my community here of thoughtful real estate entrepreneurs. Sometimes people ask me like, well, why do you say real estate entrepreneurs instead of real estate investors? And a big part of my answer to that question is I like us to be flexible in maybe different ways that we can identify and capitalize on the opportunity that a particular situation presents. And I've always felt, I learned this from my coaches, the person who has the best grasp on the details of the local zoning code is the person who's going to be able to see opportunity best, right? The dimensions that are required for this and that, and you will see opportunity where others don't. And to me, that's a big part of like why this is a thoughtful real estate type of a topic, is that we can see opportunity where others don't. Every other buyer might be just looking at an existing single family house, seeing an existing single family house, but your lens, or you even call them ADU goggles the other day, right? Your ADU goggles. Yeah, I knew they'd be handy. The ADU goggles, right, give you a totally different perspective on what's possible. So I'm glad that you mentioned that, because I almost forgot to bring up that idea of becoming the local or the expert in the local zoning code.
Yeah, great point. It's probably the most valuable underutilized piece of any real estate deal, in my opinion. It's literally the rule book of how we make money, and nobody wants to look at it or read it or take the time. And the worst part of that is it's not that much time, and it's usually not that much reading. And I tell people, if they're going into an emerging market or they're going into an established market, it doesn't matter what you're looking to do. If you want to build an RV park, you want a manufactured home park, you want to do mixed use, you want to do self-storage, it doesn't matter. Read the zoning code, look at allowable uses, study the zoning map. You could really become an expert in this in a weekend and have such a leg up on other investors. You're going to be educating your realtor. You're going to be potentially educating your owner, in your case, where you have a lot of followers that are looking for kind of off-market owner-seller finance. So you can really bring a lot to the table with just education by teaching people the rules that really are the umbrella of the product that they're trying to sell and you're trying to buy. So you couldn't have said that better. And nobody looks at it. I still don't understand why it's so overlooked when it's the playbook for our strategy. And it's just one more tool as well. If you can be really good at zoning, and you can be really good at writing offers, and you can be really good at talking about different creative financing options, and you can be really good at painting the house, it's just one more tool that's going to make you better. It's going to bring you to the top of the list in a competitive market, especially today where we live in appreciation markets on the West Coast. Is you need every single advantage you can to get a decent deal or to make a decent deal. And if you have any hopes at a great deal, you're just going to need more and more tools than your competitors. So that's why I always kind of harp on zoning, even though it's no fun, it's not sexy. You can't really talk about it. Nobody's interested in hearing about it, but it's probably the most important part of any real estate strategy.
Yeah. It's not like curling up with the latest Dan Brown book or something like that, but I think it's very, very valuable reading. Very valuable reading. So let's talk about the ADU goggles a little bit, because I think that this is something that if somebody could walk away from listening to this podcast, I would love nothing more than for them to come out with their own sort of ADU goggles, so that every seller they're talking to from here on out, every property they're looking at, they're seeing a different lens on what they might have seen before. I call this sort of in my language, opportunity vision. When we look at something and whatever opportunity we see is hopefully different than and more than what other people see, right? And even the sellers of the properties we're talking about buying, I like to say that we can negotiate to buy an apple, but what we're really buying is an orange. So in this case, we're negotiating to buy a house based on what it is, which is a house. And the seller's thing, I'm selling you a house. And you're like, yes, I'm buying a house. However, in your head, you're thinking, I'm buying a house and a future ADU. And to me, that's what I mean when I talk about opportunity vision. So if you could give everybody a kind of a quick briefing on just like the basic level of putting those ADU goggles on, right? So you find yourself, you get a call back from a seller, you're going to go have a little chat with them at the property, perhaps. What are the top couple things that your eyes are scanning the property for to get kind of a quick assessment of how much potential you see there? I mean, to some degree, every lot has ADU potential, right? If you're in an ADU, like a municipality that allows ADUs, you could pretty much technically kind of do it anywhere. However, there's certainly certain places, properties are going to kind of lend themselves a little bit better to it. So can you give us a briefing on like what should people be looking for in order to strap on those ADU goggles?
Yeah, awesome. So first and foremost is you have to do your homework. You have to start, again, we can't get tunnel vision on the house, the location, the price, the paint, the curb appeal. Is this an area that has accessory dwelling units in their code as allowable uses, period? Because if it's not, the strategy does not apply. So you have to already know when you go on that appointment that this is an area that the ADU strategy is deployable in. The next thing I'm looking for right when I pull up is parking. Is there off-street parking? Can I meet off-street parking requirements? Am I going to be able to turn this into an accessory dwelling unit strategy property and park the tenants in both places or three places if you're in an area that allows 2 ADUs? So parking is huge. The next thing that I'm going to look for is kind of utilities. I really am looking for where's the utility panel, where is the sewer line. I mean, I'm known for this. Whenever I go look at a house, I go straight to the crawl space and I stick my head underneath and I look at where the water line's coming in. I look at where the sewer line's coming in, because that's the roadmap of the infrastructure that I'm going to need to split this into 2 or 3 units. So those are some quick things that I look for. I also look for really obvious signs that this is going to be an easy ADU property. And my first lens on my ADU goggles, and for those watching this, you can see it. I'm just putting on a goofy pair of science class goggles, but it's what is going to be easy and affordable and attainable. So I'm looking for split level houses. I'm looking for maybe a bonus room above a garage. I always look for the low lying fruit first. Is the master bedroom on a different side of the house? So I first look for where would an attached accessory dwelling unit go? And that's easier than building a detached accessory dwelling unit, which we'll kind of touch on in a minute. But the first things I'm looking for is parking. I'm looking for utilities, and I'm looking for where's an easy spot to deploy this strategy. And then I think the final gauge that I always use is how does it feel? I don't understand how people can buy volume where they don't even go. Maybe they send an acquisitions person out. I'm not at that level, but I also don't feel that's the best opportunity. If you have maybe less than 100 units, you need to show up there. How does it feel? How does it smell? How does it look? Is the neighbor's dog barking at you for 30 minutes straight while you're walking around? How is the traffic? Is there a stop sign near? Is the speed limit 35 or 45 in front of the house? So there's a lot of variables that I kind of throw into this stew in my head that I'm kind of analyzing as I walk around. But those are the first few.
Yeah.
And if it's a detached accessory dwelling unit play, I'm looking for first and foremost a flat lot.
Yeah.
Flat. If it's got a gigantic backyard, but it's downhill and it's covered with trees, that's not going to be easy to run sewer. It's not going to be easy to build a foundation. It'll probably have to be, engineered by a soil engineer. There's all these things that drive costs. So if it's detached, I want access, maybe driving access, maybe foot access, but I want a flat lot. That's the most important thing. And probably second to that would be, is there alley access?
Yeah. Oh, aren't alleys fantastic for ADUs? Because, and not, gosh, it's a small percentage of neighborhoods that are designed in a way that have alleys, but I absolutely love alley neighborhoods for ADUs, because you can build that thing back there, whether it's detached or attached, and the residents, even though technically I'm sure in most codes, like there has to be some path to the actual street frontage, for the ADU. In reality, they'll probably be approaching their ADU from the alley. So it feels very private. It almost feels like 2 properties on one property. Anyway,
yeah,
I love the alley.
Well, very, very well said. Yeah, alley access is great. Most codes read that you have to have parking within 200 feet of the unit. So you don't have to be able to drive beside the house to the backyard. If you're on an alley, you usually can drive to it. So that's a benefit. But, I've learned over the years doing this strategy lots and lots of times and helping hundreds of people do it, that you don't have to be able to pull right up to an accessory dwelling. People don't mind walking 30, 50, 100 feet even to that unit. But yeah, those are the things that I'm looking for when I throw my ADU goggles on when I get to a property. The sewer line, this is kind of a little more technical, but within 5 feet of the exterior of the house, per code, you have to have a sewer clean out. So a lot of times if you do a lap around the house, you'll see what looks like the back end of a spud gun. It's really just a 3 or 4 inch plastic cap. And that is where a plumber would come and, maybe bore out your sewer if you had a clog, but that's going to indicate where the sewer comes out of the house. And if you pop that cap off and you look down into it with a flashlight, you can see how deep it is. And if it's really deep, what that's going to tell me is that I'll have a long range kind of circle outside of that primary house where I can put an accessory dwelling unit and make fall for sewer. So power and, water, cable, gas, all that stuff can be run flat underground, but sewer, unless we want to pump it, which we try not to, has to fall with grade. So grade is another really big one if it's a detached. But again, none of these have to do with price. Like I'm never, ever looking at the price. When I find out that it meets all of these criteria, that's when I work backwards to the price. And what I like to talk and share about this strategy is we can pay more. Like we don't have to get a deal. Like everybody's looking for a deal. I pay more. I pay more than people want for their property a lot of times because I know the potential that it has. So we get so focused in real estate on price and getting good deals. And I need an off-market seller and I got to lowball them. Like that's not the case in this strategy. If all the kind of pegs fit and there's a pretty easy roadmap to a second or third unit, I like to offer and pay more.
Yeah, absolutely. I and everybody listening definitely totally agrees with that. Yeah, we're not in the business of finding distress and then trying to find ways to squeeze it. We're trying to negotiate in a very relational manner. But as I like to teach my coaching students, we're looking for upside more than just trying to get a discount on what's already there. We're trying to look for upside, and I think that's a big topic I wanted to make sure that we cover here. Is in my opinion, my experience, my perspective, an ADU can take a deal that doesn't make sense as a house and make it make sense, or one that's sort of marginal and it kind of goes from like, well, gosh, we have $50 a month in the black, positive cash flow. That's not really meeting my standards. But now with an ADU, it absolutely exceeds meets or exceeds my expectations. Or it can take something that doesn't quite work, actually doesn't quite pencil, and actually make it pencil. And the first time this hit me was when my own coach Greg said, well, think about it this way: if you buy this property and you can underwrite it so it kind of like just breaks even, but there's this potential for an ADU, it's kind of like you've got a free building lot, right? You've bought something that by itself isn't giving you a huge financial win each month, but you have a free lot to build on, right? So if somebody is listening to this with like a 1% rule kind of mentality, which is not really is what I do, but a lot of people bring that like, okay, 1% rule kind of thing. They can look at a single family home deal and say, well, this doesn't meet the 1% rule, so I won't buy it. But the truth is, if you can get it close enough, you might be able to just build on your sort of quote free building lot to build an ADU it meets or exceeds that 1% rule. And then the property as a whole is meeting your standard for whatever cash flow might be. So it's like suddenly I became the guest here. Sorry for going off on a tangent.
No, you're right. You're right on. You're right on. That's why you're the host and you have the success you do, is because you understand it. And that's a great point. So every house that we're looking to buy with this strategy is going to have option for an attached ADU and a land banked lot for a detached ADU. And that's really exciting that you even brought that up, because there's some legislation that's brand new in our state where there's going to be potential to build a detached accessory dwelling unit and then do a fee simple lot split and be able to sell that off separately, and not with condo law, with actual fee simple lot law. So there's another huge advantage. If somebody buys a house that they've got this free lot, for all intents and purposes, it's not a free lot because it's on the same primary tax lot of record, but it's a free buildable space. that now with some new state legislation in our state, this is in Oregon in 2022, is potentially going to be able to be split off with a minor land partition and sold. So that's, you take an average property of say $400,000 or $500,000 and you build what last year would have been appraised at $100,000, 500 square foot ADU in the back. But if you do it this year and you split the lot, it might cost you another 20% to bring private services to that. But you have a small lot and a small house that may be valued at 400,000. So the upside is just, it's huge. So when you went down the strategy of kind of the free lot method, that's more true than most people know because of new legislation. And I see that, in my opinion, is going to also sweep across the country as we set the standard for that. And, other areas like California, which is probably the largest ADU market in the country right now, with a lot of people and a lot of money and a lot of media. And as soon as they get that train moving, it's going to be really hard to slow it down. I see that becoming a huge play. We're not going to have super affordable housing anywhere, but because it'll be on smaller lots and there'll be smaller units, they're going to be more affordable because of that.
Yeah.
And I see that gaining traction too.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes sense that it would. So one of my big ahas when you were speaking the other day was about, I guess I'd put it under the headline of like the difference between creating new space as an ADU versus repurposing some space that's already in the property, basically finished space as an ADU, right? So my whole frame of reference really before was like, oh yeah, there's a garage. It's just a garage. It could be converted to an ADU. That's kind of the creation of new space, right? Or I mentioned the other day, I have a lot of like basement mentality in my market. There's a lot of homes from the 20s, a lot of basements, and I'm always walking into basements and quickly with my ADU goggles trying to assess whether there's good potential in there or not. But when you talked the other day, you talked about the idea of looking at like maybe a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house and basically lopping off the master suite and starting with that. And that was I don't know why I've never thought about that before, but that was an aha moment for me. Could you explain to us kind of what you mean by that strategy as an efficient and effective way to kind of, a catapult launching pad for an ADU?
Yeah, great. So I'm looking for the most affordable, efficient, achievable way to create a second unit. And I want to keep the price as low as I can so I can pass the savings on to my tenant. I also want to keep the price as low as I can to create a higher yield. And the easiest way to do that is to take the path of least resistance. And most of the time, it's going to be converting already legal living space. Not only is it easier, it's faster. We're not having to change usually hardly any of the utilities. It doesn't always work, but I am looking for, if you're a current homeowner and you want to deploy this strategy, it may not work in your house. But if you're looking to buy your first ADU property, there's no excuse you can't find one because they're all over the place. And things I look for are just odd, kind of archaic, bad designs. A lot of houses that were built in the 80s had these big second formal dining rooms. Those are perfect. If you have a master bedroom that's on a different side of the house, what's so cool about the master bedroom conversion strategy is it's going to be an easy, effective way because it already has a living space. Say it's a larger bedroom, maybe 300 or 400 square feet, and it already has a bathroom. All we're going to need to add to make that a legal second dwelling that's going to be applicable for its own living space and its own certificate of occupancy is a heat source, and it's going to need some sort of kitchen. And it's really easy to run hot and cold water and to run a 2-inch drain. If you already have a bathroom, you have a 4-inch drain or a 3-inch drain, but it'll be really easy to hook up a sink, and it's really easy to run power. So we're basically looking for a master bedroom that has a 10 to 12 foot single wall that we can put a 1-wall galley kitchen on, because those utilities are really easy to run. It's the bathroom that's always the hardest. And so people say, hey, this has a ADU potential. There's a nice big garage. I want to put an ADU in the garage. And there's 2 huge red flags there. One is it's going to be really hard to meet the parking standard at the city planning level when you take away your parking and you turn it into living space. And 2, it's a lot of times it's really hard to get fall because a house most of the time is going to be built on a crawl space foundation, elevated 24 to 36 inches above grade. And just based on basic simple principles of having to drive in and out of a garage, it's usually 24 to 36 inches lower than the finished living space in the house. That's why a lot of times you have steps from your garage, which is going to be a plumbing issue. And that's if you're able to cut down into the concrete and make fall for plumbing. Some municipalities will make you put what are called sleepers down and insulate that floor, which puts you closer to the ceiling. So if you don't have a vaulted ceiling in your garage, you're going to have some head height issues. And by the time you kind of revamp your grades for plumbing and pull the roof off of your garage to get some volume, you may as well have just built a standalone. So I always just tell people, look for the easiest spot. And in my experience for doing this for 2.5 decades, it's always going to be the master bedroom or a different part of the house that's not the garage. I shouldn't say always. I've seen a couple examples where a garage would be decent. And I get this question all the time that people say, Derek, that's not true. I just did one above my garage. Above a garage is different. If you have bonus room above your garage, or you have vaulted trusses, or you have attic trusses, and you have this big space above your garage, which a lot of people do, that's completely different than a garage conversion. When I hear garage conversion, that means they're going to turn the space where they park into an ADU. So I like to look for the easy, simple way. And the other thing that sometimes comes up with a master is it already has the bedroom that could be a studio. It could be walled off into a 1-1. You put in the kitchen, and then many times we have to punch an exterior door in. But when it comes to cutting in a door and putting in a kitchenette, that's literally a couple week project that you can do for $30,000 or $40,000. Whereas if you're going to revamp and change the use of a space, like a garage or a detached shed or something that people automatically go to with their ADU goggles, you're just going to spend more time and money.
Yeah. So in the case of lopping off the master suite and converting it into an ADU, there's going to be fire separation requirements there too. Is that right?
Yeah. So there'll have to be a fire break, depending on your AHG building code. If you look at the International Residential Building Code, it's pretty simple to meet. You just do, I like to do 2 layers of 5/8 type X drywall. I do that for 2 reasons. I would only need 1 layer to meet fire code, but I like to do 2 layers. And in between those 2 layers of 5/8, I do a proprietary soundproofing compound called green glue. If you're going to do any shared wall, over, under, side by side, any shared wall ADU, I recommend you go to soundcal.com and look at their soundproofing strategies, because it's really, really important. We don't want to put all this time and money and effort into this project and then have 2 tenants that are always complaining about noise from the other. That's one reason why I steer away from over-unders personally, because of noise. But the life safety is going to be walling off that shared space and making sure that there's a continuous fire break from floor to ceiling. Sometimes if there's an attic, the building department will make you go up in the attic and actually do a fire break there as well. A lot of jurisdictions will also make sure that you have an independently separate wired smoke detector, O2 detector in each unit. So they're not on the same system, in other words. And they're pretty simple to get permitted. This is the strategy I use. I look for the plans at the county or the city of when the house was built. So the planning department is going to want to see the current design of the house. So if I get the current blueprints from when it was built, I have that. And then I simply copy those blueprints and I just use a red pen over the same blueprints to show the changes that I'm going to make, where I'm going to be running power, where I'm going to have GFI protected outlets above the kitchenette, stuff like that. So it's also easier to plan.
Yeah.
When you're doing an ADU conversion. I call them convertibles. And I'm not talking about the sports car where the top comes down. I'm talking about a cash producing asset that will buy one of those for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are going to be some times when somebody is looking at a property that actually is zoned for 2 units. The zoning by itself is already allowing 2 units. And so I just remember this in a couple deals myself. I was looking at this saying, I want to add a second unit. And I think I could kind of go the duplex route, or I could go the ADU route, either way, but actually turned out they were very different paths, right? So for people who come across that situation, like what are some of the considerations that somebody might have in sort of deciding which route to go down? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. It depends on your goals. The only reason I got into the attached accessory dwelling unit strategy and threw that into my repertoire of ADUs is because one of my favorite markets that I invest in allows 2 accessory dwelling units. But if you have 2, one has to be attached and one has to be detached. The differences in the planning world between an accessory dwelling unit and a duplex are actually very clear, and they're very different animals. A duplex is usually in a multifamily zone and you're held to a multifamily standard. So think fire sprinklers, sidewalks, curb and gutter, street trees. Think a lot more money to create a duplex. In most cases, duplex isn't going to have a size cap requirement like accessories do. The accessory dwelling unit, the easiest way to explain it is accessory to the primary structure, where a duplex is going to be its own standalone unit. Some jurisdictions will make you put a separate meter and all separate utilities on a duplex. If you plan to use some kind of fee simple lot split in the future, they're still ironing out some of these codes that I've looked at across the country, but a lot of times you'll have to have independent sewer services and independent water meters for each of those. And both of those are huge costs of impact fees or fees, charges to do that. And then another big one that comes up a lot, and I learned this the hard way, is financing. Mm-hmm. So outside of the FHA world, so if you have good credit and you're a more savvy investor, you're probably not going to be going FHA. But if you're looking at just kind of QM loans on this product, a duplex is going to require 15 or 20% down most of the time, where a single family house that's set up just like a duplex, but it's an ADU, it's accessory to the primary, so it won't. There's also a ton of insurance benefits to having the accessory dwelling unit as your primary. There's examples where a duplex would be a way better strategy. For example, if you live in a municipality that allows ADUs, but with that ADU, there's a residency requirement, or there's a restriction to short-term rentals. But if you are able to do a duplex, you can go around those rules and you don't have a residency requirement because it's a separate standalone entity. So it really just depends on your goals, and you have to become an expert in your local zoning code, period. And the nuance of duplexes being allowed in a lot of single family zones is also really new. The past really 24 to 36 months, a lot of cities, counties, and states are saying we are eliminating single family zoning in our state or in our city, which means that most lots that were reserved primarily for low density residential now can allow duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes, or at least duplexes. So those are some benefits. If you're trying to buy something and house hack your way into 2 or 3 units, you'd want to go with the ADU strategy. If you're an investor and you have no problem putting 20% down and you want to capitalize on big gains right now in short-term markets, you would build that out as a duplex. So it just depends. If you're a buy and hold investor, I would think that you would want to use the ADU strategy. That's what I use for several different reasons. That would be its own show, but a lot of them have to do with costs, resale, taxes, depreciation. Rental laws are different if it's secondary to a primary as opposed to if it's own standalone unit. And in areas where, in areas that are very, very landlord unfriendly, there's some large benefits to that.
Yeah. I think a little bit about the resale, the perception upon resale too, is a house with an ADU still pretty much looks like a house that has an additional accessory space. Whereas a lot of times a duplex looks like a duplex, right? You see 2 front doors, you see 2 separate garages, all of that. And I imagine maybe some of the rules around front doors and stuff vary a little bit from municipality to municipality, but I know where I do business that the ADU front door actually can't be visible, I think, from the street, so that because they really intentionally wanted to not sort of quote look like a duplex, but to have that additional housing too. So I might, upon resale, even attract kind of a different buyer profile, someone who wants to feel like they live in a house, but then there's this rentable space also, rather than somebody who wants to feel like they're living in a duplex. I don't know if that's just my own little nuance.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I post an ADU picture every Friday of different types of ADUs. Some are mine, some are ADUs that I run or drive by. But yeah, you're totally right. Duplexes look like shared wall, 2 units, and ADUs by design, by code. It's very, very common in code language to say that it can't share the same entry side of the house. So they're more camouflaged in when you're talking about attached ADUs. So great point. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah. And so you mentioned financing, and there's a lot of people who have gotten very excited in the last several years about what's called the BRRRR method these days, right? And to me, an ADU strategy is really, really well suited for a BRRRR method type of approach. First of all, are you familiar with that term?
Very. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
this is a question I
Yeah.
get probably second most. So yeah, go ahead, shoot.
Yeah. So yeah, it's I guess maybe the question is like, do you agree? To me, it seems like, it's one thing to buy a house and sort of upgrade it with granite countertops and put a new roof on it and expect that to add enough value so that you can refinance it and recapitalize yourself. But something like adding an ADU is like it's not an upgrade. It's a transformation of a property from what it used to be to what it is now, or what it could be. Right. And so thus that really justifies a massive change in value to justify the higher appraisal and to refinance it, get all your cash back. Is that something you see, like mentality wise from a financing perspective? Is that something you see people with a lot?
Yeah, it not a lot. No, I see it go both ways. It's like split 50-50. And I argue this point a lot with a lot of really smart people. So the bottom line is, if you are in an area that recognizes accessory dwelling units and they have appraisals for them, and the appraisers aren't surprised when they see one, and you don't over design and overbuild it, you can burr your money back out. I tell people to plan to leave 25% of your money in the project. I have no problem building these and they would burr out at 1.5. So it's not as much, does the burr strategy work? It's, does the burr strategy work if you plan, design, and build one of these right? Because what I see a lot of times is somebody has a median priced home in a median priced neighborhood. They've got a B class home in a B class neighborhood, and they fill up their backyard with an A plus class property that has price creep as they build, and they turn out really, really nice, and they're super custom. It's like, not many people in their lifetime have a chance to build a custom home. And right now, anybody in a lot of states in our country can build a detached small custom home. And so it's really easy to get excited and overspend. So don't expect to build a really super custom accessory dwelling unit and get all your money back out. But with that being said, if you're smart and you have a good plan and you have maybe a little bit of good mentorship and you stay on budget and you don't overbuild, it's really easy to burr your money back out. And it is really similar to the burr strategy in the fact that when we think burr, we think buy a distressed property that wouldn't finance, put our own cash in it or our own creative financing or hard money into it. When it's done, there's comps all over the neighborhood. We go for a large appraisal and we get all of our money back out. That's the ultimate burr. And it's very similar to an ADU being the quickest way to finance an ADU is with your own money. So that's with a financial stack that you put together with your own cash. Maybe you're borrowing from a 401k or a 457b, or you get applicable federal rate loan from a family member, or you get hard money. There are programs out there for custom construction, for home renovation. There's some products in California where they're giving like 90 to 95 LTV on projected finished value of the accessory dwelling unit. But there's a lot of rules. You have to have a qualified builder. You have to have really, really detailed plans and budgets so you can get draws according. So it's not cheap and easy to start one of these. But if you have access to, say, 100K, and you plan and design and build a realistic, modest accessory dwelling unit that's going to rent for, say, $1,200 a month, you're going to really easily meet the 12% rule, and you're going to probably have no problem getting your money back out. But so many times I see people say, the ADU max in my area is 1,200 square feet, and they build a 1,200 square foot house at $250 a square foot, and it's not going to rent for $2,800 a month. It's probably going to rent for $1,800 a month. And so you're not going to get a good yield on it. And because you overbuilt it, you're not going to get all your money back out.
Yeah. That makes good sense. So as we start to wrap it up here, I want to kind of switch back to the other side of the brain, from the numbers and stuff, back to the other side, and I guess maybe drop down into the heart a little bit. One of the things I wrote down that you said the other day, I wrote, this just really spoke to sort of the overall ethos of what we talk about on this podcast and in this community a lot. But I wanted to hear more about what you meant by this. You said capitalism with compassion. So when you mentioned that the other day, like, can you just tell us what does that mean to you, and how does the ADU concept kind of fit into that in your mind?
So capitalism with compassion is something that just kind of came to me naturally years ago, coming from like the poor underdog tenant and really just a society that's like, damn the landlord. And I feel like I have a huge competitive advantage because I've had my heels dug in deep on both sides of that. I'm in a really high priced market, high value market, high rent market. I was a renter in the area that I invest in. And I know what it's like to take good care of a place and pay top dollar and move out and get half of my deposit held for scratches in the floor that were already there. I mean, that's happened to me. So I always told myself, if I can become an investor and if I can provide needed housing, I don't want to lose money, but I want to keep it attainable. I want to keep it affordable. I want to have a really nice product. My goal is to have the best product in the market. I want it to be super high demand, low supply, and I want to take better care of our customer than anybody else. And that's kind of the root of it. Is it just bothers me that there's all these systems for rating tenants, and there's all these parameters and criteria for getting tenants, and there's like no accountability overhead for landlords. I mean, they don't care. They just say next. There's still 20 applications behind you, and I want to, at least on a really small scale in my small area, change that and empower the tenants by treating them right, by giving them the best price that I possibly can. There's some people in our markets that gouge and really drive the prices up as high as they can. And I just don't think that there's a lot of compassion in that. Some of the rent raising rules that we have and some of the limits, I don't think there's a lot of compassion in that. So the bottom line is I'm just trying to give a better product and a better service to our tenants because they deserve it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for explaining that. That turn of phrase and the spirit behind it, capitalism with compassion, it really resonated with me. And I wanted to make sure that came up in this conversation because I have a feeling it will really resonate a lot with the people listening too. And I try to bring an energy that says like we can, like kind of I don't know, win-win is such a cliche, but like we can still make money and be doing right by other people along the way. And that's our in this community, our whole acquisition concept is based on that. And now this applies also then into our relationship with tenants. And so anyway, I just want to make sure that got highlighted here too. Well, I sure appreciate you bring just this incredibly immense, set of knowledge and experience on this, but then also delivered in the wrapper of a lot of heart. And I really appreciate that. And just, you are a perfect fit for everything we do here. And I appreciate you coming to share some of that heart and expertise with us today. If people, and by if I mean when, people want to find out more about you and what you're doing, what's the best way for people to keep up with you and your work?
So you can find me at thataduguy.com, and I've got a lot of free resources there. I have a lot of, other people that do ADU stuff, kind of a landing page for them, depending on your region. I have a couple of sets of free accessory dwelling unit plans that you can download off of my site. And I'm probably most active on Instagram. I have a YouTube channel. I'm That ADU Guy everywhere. But thataduguy.com is kind of the landing page where I have, links to all of the different stuff that I'm doing, as well as links to other people that are doing the same stuff. So I just, again, there's no competition here. It's just collaboration. How do we get the most outreach to the most amount of people?
Yeah, I love that. And, when we first met, before you presented the night before, somebody introduced us, and I hope it's okay for me to say this. And
Share anything.
I just paraphrase because I'm sure this isn't exactly what you said, but you said something to me that was right along the lines of, my goal is always to have financial freedom so that I can have freedom of time, which would then enable me to devote as much of my time as possible to helping other people in ways like what you do now. And so I just want to say that's awesome. And I'm grateful that you achieved that, because we're all now the beneficiaries of you sharing your knowledge and you having the time to do things like this interview and to do the work you do. So anyway, that's a heck of a role model for us all. So thank you so much.
Oh, awesome. Yeah. And that's, thanks for bringing that up. And that's not lip service. If you go to thataduguy.com, you can schedule a free hour with me. If you're a first-time buyer or you're looking to get into this industry, or you're shopping for your first house and you want to consider the ADU strategy, you can call me, schedule an appointment. I'll give you 1 hour of my time for free. And I spend probably 20 to 30 hours a week taking those calls. So this is not like a punchline. This is what I do. So I'm glad you brought that up. And I really look forward to helping your listeners. All I ask is if you call me, just be ready to take action.
Yeah, boy, that's the perfect standard, the perfect litmus test right there. Thank you, Derek. I appreciate this so much.
Thank you.